This is the Promising Practices for Health Equity podcast, brought to you by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Hello, and welcome to Promising Practices for Health Equity, the podcast created by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, affectionately known as IRL. I'm your host, Krystal Lee, and I am so pleased that my co-host today is Mandy LaBreche, Associate Director of Operations for IRL. Hey, Mandy.
Hey, Krystal.
Mandy, in our last episode, we talked with Luis Ortega of Storytellers for Change about storytelling as a promising practice and as the foundation of this podcast. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to go back and listen to Luis's episode. We talk about the connection between stories and systems and how storytelling can be used as a tool for health equity. Today, we have the enormous privilege of talking with Nancy Fishman, former program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, RWJF. Hello, Nancy, and thank you for being here with us.
Hi there, happy to be here.
Nancy, we're so grateful to have you with us. Before we get started, jump into our conversation, we just want to invite you to check in with us. So one of our core beliefs in IRL is that nurturing personal relationships is one key to building the kinds of communities that can collaborate effectively in the work towards health equity. So at the beginning of our meetings, what we usually do is a quick check-in to help us to continuously build connections in our team and what we call our beloved community. So here's our check-in question for today. How are you feeling physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually? I can start so I can model for you. So physically, I am feeling well. I'm feeling rested. I got some good sleep last night, which is kind of unusual for me. Intellectually, I am feeling super engaged because I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And emotionally, I'm also feeling pretty engaged. And then spiritually, just okay. Just okay. How about you, Mandy? How are you feeling today?
Yeah, I think across the PI, the E, and the S, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm always striving for balance in my life. And I feel like when I'm balanced, I don't know, I just feel better in each of these elements. So yeah, I'm always on this quest to learn lifelong activities, particularly sporting activities. So as Krystal, as you know, I learned how to swim. I took private swim lessons last fall. And now just last week, I joined this beginners running club with a group of people from the Twin Cities. So yeah, I find that when I don't know, just I'm an active, even hyperactive type of person. So I find that physically, when I'm engaged and learning new things, honing new things, it helps the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual kind of fall into place. So Nancy, how about you?
I'm good physically. I've been using some of my retirement time to keep healthy and physical. I am about to embark on a large trip tomorrow, so I'm pretty excited about learning lots of new things about a new culture, and I'm happy, but I'm a little nervous. I'm having that feeling. I'm also intellectually excited to have this conversation because this is a good time to have a caveat. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is more than 10 years ago. So I have been getting it back in gear, and I'm excited to talk about that. And spiritually, it's a journey, always life. And so I'm on my way in more ways than one.
All right, Nancy. So you worked at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, or RWJF, in the Research, Evaluation, and Learning Unit for 24 years. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the foundation and about your role in creating Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program?
Sure. When you work at the foundation, you do work at a variety of different topics. So I worked a lot in community health for the elderly and nursing workforce issues, which sort of led me more towards leadership issues. I worked, as you said, in the research and evaluation. So we tried to learn either about a topic or about a program. We did research on topics that were important to the foundation, or we did evaluations of our existing programs. So I did both those things. And I spent many years in what we called our leadership group, thinking about ways to do leadership programs. And that brings me to IRL in around 2014. So right, as I said, we're going back a ways. The foundation was embarking on our whole kind of new, not new, but articulating better what our mission was around a culture of health. And we, during that process, took a hard look at many of our leadership programs because we had many individual leaders, whether it's in research or clinical or community. And we decided to transform many of them and end them, and some that had been around for 40 years. So it was interesting and hard sometimes to make change is hard. Change is hard on everyone. So it was kind of a hard time, but we did, after a lot of soul searching, a lot getting input from a lot of people, we did come up with 4 different programs that we were going to concentrate on. They were going to be bigger than our other programs, and they were going to try to incorporate a bunch of different things. They were also going to be, and we'll talk about this later, I think too, interdisciplinary in the sense that we had programs that were only for doctors or only for nurses, and we were not going to have any more of those programs. We were going to try to make sure, because we felt like the idea of intermingling all professions in health was going to helpful and be more helpful. So these programs, these 4 new programs, were designed, and interdisciplinary research leaders was one of them. It was really meant, we had a bunch of different research programs going on, and this was the only research program in the bundle. The other ones were clinical scholars, and then a program for young scholars of diverse backgrounds, and then one for community leaders, and then this one for researchers and community leaders. And so that's why we decided we needed to develop an IRL.
I love that. Can you share a little bit more about what the original vision for IRL was at the time this was all being developed? And if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what your motivation and hopes for the program were at the time when it was just getting started or developed?
Mm-hmm. So we knew we wanted a research program. We wanted to support researchers, but we wanted to do it in a slightly different way. We had in the past researchers who were in Research One institutions and pretty much ivory tower kind of feel. They were doing the research and they did excellent work, but it was kind of classic social science research of various types, but still. So one of the things we knew we wanted to do was have things more community oriented, more. Then we started thinking, well, of course we want something sort of community, the participatory research. And I then, and again, this isn't apologies because it was 10 years ago, but I spoke with you guys about this. We had somebody come and talk to us who was really a pioneer in community participatory research. And I left that meeting realizing, I said, wow, we don't want just to fund researchers. What we want to do is make sure that the people in the community are part of the program. So they get the leadership, they get the stipend, they're really part of the team. And they're not kind of a traditional where we give researchers money and they go out to the community, and that doesn't always go so well. They don't have the right insight. And I think we've learned so much over time in IRL about making that work. So it was just an original thought that we wanted the community person on the team. We decided we definitely wanted a team of people, again, so we wouldn't be stuck in an ivory tower. We would be, even if we were in an ivory tower, let me just say, we would be in a number of them, and that interplay would benefit everybody. that there'd be more give and take, and that's not how we talk. We talk this way. Everybody has their own terms. So that's really where we were. We knew we wanted a research program, and we knew we wanted something that was more community driven and that was leading more towards our thinking about the value, social value and culture of health. And of course, social determinants of health had become in 2014 all the rage, as it should be. People were really understanding what you had to study. So we wanted to incorporate all those things. I will say we had, giving credit where credit is due, we had design firms come in. We funded, I don't know how many, design firms, and we gave them ideas. We want a research program. We talked to them about what we wanted. And then they all came back with ideas, some of them really outside the box. Oh, I wish I could remember one of them. It was really wild. It wasn't for the research program. It was for one of the other programs. It had to do with, I think, making a TV show. And it didn't in the end work with what we wanted to do, but I just wanted to give an idea that we were kind of trying to incorporate new things and new ways of thinking. And so I did pull things from the design I got. Mostly, you guys will relate to this, the idea that we have a planning period so that we can really, I don't know, 6 months, is that what we use? 6-month planning period or whatever it is. And then it gets kind of shaped and approved and moves on. And that was part of the design people, the idea. And also the idea of it, of course, being interdisciplinary, they agreed with that. So, we were trying to reach all sorts of people and get all sorts of ideas. And we had an advisory committee too. And then we wrote up our document calling for people to run these programs. Again, there were 4 programs. We sent it out, and you actually could, if you wanted to, apply to all 4. Not too many places did that, but some places applied to more than one and went through the process. And then, of course, once we gave the grant, we almost started the design over again, because there's so many little things. Every particular little question suddenly brings up a great big issue. For instance, what do we call the people, the community people? The guys are shaking your head, but they're not community researchers. We didn't want to put a researcher in that place. We wanted somebody who was head of a nonprofit or whatever they were doing. I know when I looked back at that piece of paper and it says community mentors. We couldn't, but I remember talking with Michael and Jan and just trying to figure out what other word we can use. We just, I think, ended up with team participants, and some of them were researchers and some of them were community members. But even a little thing like that makes you step back and think, well, what is their role and is it different? And, how do you value it? And it made a difference. So anyway, of course, when we gave the grant to University of Minnesota, we almost, you don't start again, but you start over in a way.
Thanks for that context, Nancy. And I really appreciate the point that you made about what we call the people who are involved in this program, because words matter.
I know, exactly.
Words matter. And so I think that's an important lesson to take away for future efforts like this, to be intentional about how we describe what we're asking for and who we want to participate, because we want people to be able to see themselves as part of the group that they're being invited to be a part of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's dig a little deeper into words. So what words mean. Interdisciplinary research leaders, what were the intentions, and you alluded to this earlier, but what were the intentions behind using the concepts of interdisciplinarity, research, and leadership in creating this new program for the foundation?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll start with leaders, because it was in this package of programs where we wanted to create a large cohort of leaders who really understood health from the point of the community and social determinants of health and how to work with the community. And so it wasn't that that framework sat over all 4 programs. And so leaders, that was part of what we wanted. We wanted people who could drive change. And most of the people, we knew people, we weren't inventing this, but we wanted to give people still tools that they would be able to use in order to make change in their community and nation. And so that leadership was the big umbrella. And research, as I mentioned, we wanted to have a bunch of different spokes on this wheel. One of them were community leaders. One of them was research leaders, student leaders. We wanted to get more, that was the student program. And then clinical, our clinical leaders that were very similar in attitude, because they were also always interdisciplinary, but we wanted them to, of course, what their research was going to be a little different than what our research was in IRL. They didn't always have to have a research program, but many of them did. But anyway, so and then interdisciplinary for us, like I said, just to compare to clinical scholars, that was mostly all clinicians, nurses, dietitians, pharmacists, doctors, of course, and all sorts of people joined that program. And that was the intent. And for ours, our past programs had very much been social sciences, which we still were, of course, very strong on. But the idea that we could expand that, we also wanted some people with medical or nursing backgrounds in, that would be fine. And we got them, I know we did. And our regular, more social science, and of course, public health. Those are, like I said, social science, public health, those are the people we always funded. But we wanted to be able to make sure that we could tug on their experiences. And again, just to expand everybody's mind by throwing in a geographer, anthropologist, of course. I think we funded many anthropologists, actually, but a variety of other things for the tug and the pull of having those conversations, which always broadens your view. And so that's what interdisciplinary, it was very broad. We did require that they be a researcher, have research experience. This was not a program for brand new postdoc researchers. This was people who had experience, but we wanted to somehow possibly change their frame a little bit to make it a little more community oriented, or just the experience. Maybe they were fabulous community researchers, had done lots of participatory, community research, but maybe they hadn't done it on the topics that we might choose, or maybe they hadn't done it with, I'll just say a nurse, because I do a lot of a nurse involved before, and they're, political science researchers. And so we wanted to make that kind of the thing. The thing I always would say about IRL when it was hard, because it was always, getting the teams to work together, and it was hard. That was the work of IRL. That was the whole point. The whole point was to get through that struggle.
Thanks for sharing, Nancy. I want to go back a little bit to something you mentioned earlier about a guest that you had at the foundation that really influenced the decision to incorporate the community in a different way than you had in the past. Could you talk a little bit about how, in thinking about IRL, how the community was a part of the conceptualization of the program and what you hoped to come from that?
I think we were aware, and I possibly from this talk, but others, of community-based participatory research was out there and had been going on for years and years, but didn't always go smoothly, didn't always end up answering the question the community really wanted. It often answered the question the researchers wanted to answer for the community. And so I think when we started to think about it, we thought, well, there's lots of experience with CBPR, but is there a way to tweak it? And so I think that after hearing from people, particularly, one talk, we were talking to somebody who had a lot of experience with this. I thought, well, part of the problem, I think, is that they have to be part of the group from the beginning to have the same agency as the researchers, because of course all community-based research. They came into the community and sat with people and they talked with people. I believe that, that of course that happened, but then they went away and they didn't bring a community person with them to keep bugging them. And I kind of was thinking maybe, you get that the community people are gonna be in every meeting and have the same kind of training. And one of the things I definitely brought from my work was actually my work in nursing workforce. And that was to be able to have people who weren't researchers. And it first dawned on me when I was working with a bunch of bedside nurses, but true for community nonprofit leaders also. They have to be able to understand research well enough to use it. Like if they really understand it. So we did want an IRL, and I know, like I said, in my past programs, I saw that. As a nurse myself, I kind of understood that if you don't have the agency or the knowledge to speak about data, this person collect this data, but then you don't use the right term or you get mixed up, you're just not as impactful. So that was also, it wasn't just that we were going to use the community members to answer the correct questions. We wanted to leave them with the ability to use the research.
I just have a quick follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, I liked how you talked about in one of your earlier answers, just the push and pull, the struggle and the joy of 3 people coming together to do this community engaged project and work together throughout 3 years of this fellowship program.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we've heard throughout the whole program, just why is there 2 researchers and only 1 community partner? So I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more in terms of the development of IRL and how you all arrived at 3 people, 2 researchers, 1 community partner, because I feel like that has been an ongoing theme that people
true.
have
Yeah.
critiqued, I guess, is just the imbalance in researchers and community leaders.
Yeah, totally. That's a good question. And that is a question that I recall, and Mandy, you might have been part of those conversations early on, that when, as I said, after Minnesota got the grant, there was still another whole design problem. And we could have been free to do it that way, but I hate to say this, but it is a money thing. We would have to have decreased the number of teams greatly to balance it. And I think the foundation felt pretty strongly that there had to be at least 2 researchers, because you can't be interdisciplinary if you only have 1. And remember, in this umbrella of programs, this was the research program. We had a whole nother program that had teams of community leaders, and they came together as a team to do a community project. And so yes, there's that push and pull, and I know it was difficult, and there was definitely some power struggle there. And I know as time went on, an interesting part was who got the grant. And that's the whole, and I have to say, this is all stuff we were learning too, right? We were all learning this together. Who got the grant made a big difference. The amount of care that a community person needs is different than a researcher. The amount of care a community person needs working at a small nonprofit, I should say, is different than the amount of care a researcher needs working at a great big giant institution. Although I don't mean they don't mean care, they just need different things. And it comes to and the power tug too. So ideally, I suppose it would have been fun to have 4 people on every team too, and that would have been nice. And I think that would have decreased the teams a lot. I have to say, it just comes back to our umbrella thinking of this as a research program and money. Because we only have so much money. We had a lot of money, but we didn't have enough money to do everything. Do you think as you talked to teams over the years, that would have been a better choice overall to do maybe 2 and 2? You hear it enough in the last 3 or 4 cohorts that I wasn't involved in?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I do probably think overall having 2 and 2 could have been better, but I'm sure it also would present itself with different challenges than the 2-in-1 approach. There's no perfect solution there. When I think back, like the tension that we saw in the relationships of all these 3-person teams, it's not always between community and researchers. I feel like we see a good amount of tension among the 2 researchers.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Yeah,
Hmm,
it's hard to say. I
I
think it
know.
maybe would have been a little better, but then as you said, it would have meant funding fewer teams and, you know, fewer individuals overall.
We learned so much in this program, I think, and about this very specific thing that, about how teams work. And it's all learning, but some of it was, we didn't anticipate a lot of it. We really didn't. We didn't understand how much of that the struggle. As I said before, as we went on in the first couple of years, they started to think IRL that the team building is the work of the program. I mean, you're learning that people are growing probably more from that than certainly their research skills, because the researchers already had those skills, and the community members can learn research skills. That's not that hard. What's hard is learning how to work together in that group.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned like it was a continuous process of learning, and you learned so much, and there were things that you didn't think about in the beginning that emerged over time. And I just wonder, in terms of thinking about the evolution of the program while you were with the foundation and while you were working with IRL, with the benefit of hindsight, like what does that evolution look like, and what would you describe as the impact that IRL has had in moving us towards health equity?
Well, the thing that came to my mind first is totally about equity, and that is understanding that a community participant in this research team needed different things. And in order to do, and isn't that really equity? In order to be at the team in the same way that people who are supported from different organizations needed needed different things. And I think in the end, I know I'm talking with you too just recently. I did check that continued, but we did not think about, I'm just going to say, we didn't think about the fact that when you pull a community person from their nonprofit, which is what a lot of the community people came from, that leaves a big hole, and that organization suffers. And I think we just didn't think about that hard enough. And isn't that what really equity is all about? Like understanding what every person needs to be at the same level. And so I think the foundation learned that's great for all of us, that lesson. So I think that's probably one of the big lessons. I mean, I think the other big lesson is the work of getting the question right, the research question right, the project question right, whatever you want to call it, so that it met the needs of the community in a real way. And that was very difficult because, of course, when we funded these teams, they came up with their project, their research, and they had done some digging, the 3 of them together, but not a lot. And so it could be that when they talked with the community, and I kind of remember one in particular, the community had a whole different set of needs. They really didn't even care about this project. So isn't that also equity? Because if this is about a community project, about helping building a culture of health in a place or isn't it about getting that correct too? So you serve the needs of the community in a way that they need, and not the way you think they need. So that was the second big way that I feel that we learned more. We knew that was going to be, I mean, I think anybody who's done community knew that would be an issue, but we just didn't always know how much we were able to build that in, which is why I think some teams were more successful than others, but even those who weren't as successful getting their program off the ground were successful in building and learning from that experience. So
I guess now that you shared some of your bigger lessons learned from your time as program officer for IRL, Nancy, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Or is there anything you would do differently?
well, if I knew all that I know now, I would still have the same national program office. That's for sure. You guys did such a phenomenal job in bending and learning and implementing all the changes. I constantly commend you for doing that and all the many changes. Like life happens as we go through too. And so that was great. But I think that I would know so much more about what the community members of the team needed. But I would also, I think we started out, everybody was so excited. Our first couple cohorts, people were so excited to be part of it. And it was a real joy to have them. But we didn't really know, even the researchers, what level of research acumen they would have. And it varied quite a bit over the years. And I know Krystal's shaking her hand like she knows. So I don't know that you could prevent that, but I think we could definitely have anticipated the wide variety of professional experience along with personal experience everybody brought in. And of course, as we said, the thing about supporting the nonprofits that the community people were being pulled from, totally could have been done right up front, and we just didn't realize. So I think those are the kind of, you learn every time you do a big meeting too, Mandy. You would know that. And I didn't run me. I just showed up. I was lucky enough to have this great team, but we always debriefed and knew what worked and what didn't. So of course, anytime you go into a meeting now, your meetings are probably different than they were when we started. So that's hard to say I would do differently, because you don't really know what you're going to get. But I think that it would be around our community members and more flexibility for the researchers in expanding or building on what their expertise in research, and expanding it without rehashing things they already were well aware of. It was very hard to know. So it would almost have to be an individual learning plan, because I recall the first couple meetings we were trying to go over things, and some people were fascinated and some people were like, I could teach this. I'm sure you run into that to this day. Knowing that in advance, thinking that through would have been, we meaning University of Minnesota and people at the foundation who are supporting me, as we always say, we're creating the plane as we flew it, because the foundation was very devoted to getting these programs going, because we had stopped so many of our leadership programs. I believe we closed 10 of them. It was life altering for all of us to go through that process. So we were just like, we have to let the field know and the world know we are not walking away from these kind of programs. We were just changing them. So we put a lot of pressure on our new programs to make it move fast. And of course, I would say if we didn't have to do that, that would have been grand, but we didn't do it that way. So we put a lot of pressure to keep them moving, which then caused us to have a rough start. I don't know, the rough start. Like I said, the participants were all so happy to be there. And I think they had good experiences, our first cohort, particularly. They loved being guinea pigs. But I think that it would have been nice if we'd had a little more time to develop and test a few things.
All of that makes so much sense to me, especially from a curriculum standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first things that you would do is like learn about your learner.
Yeah.
See what they're already bringing with them and what they need, and then make that plan moving forward. Make the plan for them, for what you will teach them or what you will have them do to build upon that. So that makes sense to me as a lesson learned. I think that's great. Thank you for highlighting that. I wonder, Nancy, if you could tell us about what do you think IRL's legacy will be When you think about the growth of the program, like, are there things that what are some of the things that you are most proud of about the program?
Well, I am enormously proud that this program had all those cohorts and there are all those people out there. What is the final number, Mandy?
I think it's 297 fellows.
Wow. So
Mhm.
isn't that, you should all feel really proud about that, that they're out there, that they've had this experience and all the things that we just talked about, so that they have skills that they didn't have. They come and they can continue to apply them and continue to speak for health equity in their institutions. I know we didn't talk about this, but I'll turn to this right now. I do recall that the researchers themselves spent time talking about bringing this kind of knowledge into the ivory tower, as we were I keep pointing over here as if I have an ivory tower in the corner of my room. And it was hard sometimes because it wasn't valued in the same way. Let's not ignore the fact that we're going through tough times as a nation. And so I think they are going to have skills that will be very necessary. Of course, our community members will also, and as I said, hopefully have skills in working with researchers and just using information and knowing what real science is. So I think that those things are important. And I do believe that the lessons we learned as a foundation, we continue to have research programs that aren't called leadership programs. They're more on the research side, and I can't really speak to many of them because I'm no longer at the foundation. However, I do know that they're very much more engaged with community in different ways. But I think the legacy and the hard work of IRL is getting those three people together and having them work. And it was unique, but I think it's really valuable, and some of the lessons we learned were valuable for that too.
All right, Nancy, one last question before we wrap up. It's kind of a biggie, but I think it's important for our current time. Is what do you think is the role of the private sector and philanthropists like RWJF in driving health equity in the current political climate?
Well, again, and maybe I should have said this earlier because I don't work at the foundation anymore, so I don't speak for the foundation. However, having been there for 24 years, I feel like it's in my blood. And I do know, you can see by the work and what they've put out there, that they're moving forward. And I think moving forward with the work that needs to be done to improve the health of the nation. And that includes addressing disparities and improving health equity and promoting science that as real science that we know. And so I think the role of those people, particularly foundations who do not get money from federal government or state, or ours, to keep on keeping on, as they say. And I believe that is what the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is doing, is to continue to promote the needs of the people in this country, and hopefully as many other private sectors. I'm quite sure you all would feel this way too, that the nonprofit world out there, although they will be impacted if there's pullbacks on money from various points, will continue the work to address the needs of their communities and help lift up the stories of those in need and what health equity really means. And I think that their struggle is going to be much bigger. And so the role of foundations will be, of course, to continue to help that. As you both know, the purse of a foundation is nowhere near what the federal government is. So it's not as though all the foundations out there can step up and replace it. So there has to be other ways. But I think the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is holding its own and going forward with the work that it's already said is important.
Thanks for that. All right, I lied. There's technically one more question, but it's like our checkout question.
Okay.
We know that working towards equity and against systems of oppression can take its toll. And in her book, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown encourages us to, and I quote her, grow our capacity to embody the just and liberated worlds we long for. So as a final thought, can you share with our listeners how you engage in self-care as you continue to do this work?
It's really hard. It's really hard right now. Self-care is really hard. And I wake up in the morning and read too much bad news before I get going. But since I retired, what I'm mostly doing outside of the house is volunteer work. So I think that's what we all have to do, is to do more. So my self-care is action. I think that makes me feel better. I'm not very good at meditating, which I should do after I do my readings in the morning of various people and newsletters. I should meditate then. It would help my whole day, but I don't. But I do go out and do a couple different things in our community, and that helps me feel better and keep moving. And so I think action helps me with self-care more than you might think. And I'm sure meditation would help too, but I don't do it. I do exercise though. That helps.
Yep, you're checking off the boxes there. We
Yeah.
can't all be into meditation. Maybe at some point. I'm not a big meditator either, even though I do know it would benefit me hugely.
Yeah.
Nancy, we're so glad that you could spend the time with us today. It was great to see you. It's been so many years, and
Yeah, you
it
too.
felt like it was just back to 5 years ago when I joined the Zoom meeting and saw you.
I know. I don't know, you guys. I hope that I articulated something. I don't know. Or didn't
A lot
ramble
of
on too
things.
much. So it was fun. It's fun to revisit this. I'm really proud of this program, and it feels really, really good to be able to put a little cap on it.
So thank you, Nancy, and thank you to our listeners. As always, we want this to be a two-way conversation. So we would love to hear from you. What promising practices are you using in your work to achieve health equity? Share your thoughts with us via our LinkedIn page, where we will also share our show notes and some of the resources discussed in this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to Promising Practices for Health Equity so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, we're all on this journey together. And every step we take together brings us closer to a healthier, more just world. Until next time.
Promising Practices for Health Equity is produced by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. A special thanks to our guests, our production team at Studio Americana, and to you, our listeners, for being a part of this important conversation.